Sailors of Reddit, what's the weirdest creepiest thing you've seen at sea? During World War II my dad, a wireless operator on a minesweeper, passed by a German pilot, waving frantically from his still floating aircraft in the North Atlantic. They were under strict orders not to stop because of the danger of subs, so they left the poor guy to certain death. My dad died a couple of years ago, but this incident haunted him throughout his life. He wept about it even in his last few hours. I came across a man who'd hung himself on his boat 5 or 6 miles offshore about 4 or 5 years ago. The eerie and truly creepy part was realizing what it was. We just saw a boat out in the middle of oceans nowhere without anything other than blue horizon in sight, at the break of dawn, and there was fairly thick fog, as it had rained the night before. Realizing that the figure hanging from the boom was a man was one of the most haunting things I'll ever see. Sailing around in the Arabian Gulf, you could look out and see flaming flares from all of the oil rigs. You get so used to blackness when you're out to sea at night and suddenly you see massive pillars of fire rising from the ocean all around you. I used to work on those oil rigs in that area. I used to sit on the heli deck and stare out at those flares, like lampposts in a grass field. Beautiful sight. Fog. 360 degrees of thick fog. You can hardly see a couple feet in front of your face. Very creepy. And water spouts. Those are pretty cool though. You forgot the part where another boat slowly emerges out of the fog, passing you within arm's reach. All the while there's no sign of a crew. It doesn't take long and without a sound, it vanishes in the deep, white soup again. When diving, a huge seiner net drifting towards you. It wasn't anchored or attached to anything. Just a huge whirling cloud of death, full of barnacles and dolphin skeletons and decomposing fish. This is more horrifying than most of the horror fiction I've seen or read. A moving wall of decay that enfolds you, traps you inside, and eventually makes you a part of it. Those poor animals. Once thought I saw small landmass on the horizon. Upon closer inspection it turned out to be a dead whale, belly up with seagulls standing on it pecking away at its flesh. Last year I saw a seagull floating by, riding a dead seal pup. I swear he looked smug. I have family who sailed around the world. One day in the North Atlantic, their sailboat was going over some gigantic swells. They didn't have brakes at the top, so it was safe, but the boat was rising and falling way beyond the neutral. At the bottom of a trough my uncle looked up to see the sun behind a wave and the silhouette of a whale inside. Above him. Something about the immensity of whales and the ocean itself is very overwhelming and frightening. That image is horrifying to me, but I would love to see it, anyway. We were once ported out of Bahrain and we woke up to this god-awful smell. We tossed on our coveralls and headed for the weather deck to find a cargo ship on the next dock stacked 5 stories high with cages of live lambs. Losing your ship's service generator in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, late at night. Most of the electrical service to the ship is lost until the emergency diesel generator hopefully starts up. When you're used to all the vibrations and sounds in your living spaces, silence is deafening. Frick man, I get scared at the silence when my Xbox turns off at night. I can't imagine what your situation is like. The sea is a vast and seemingly empty place. Many fail to grasp this when asking questions like, how can you just lose an airplane in the ocean? I found myself, on my ship, somewhere in the vast expanses of the South Pacific Ocean. We had been cautiously avoiding big storms which I knew to be all around us, out further than the eye can see. Although our local ocean area was calm and peaceful, I was on watch when I noticed something out there, in the distance, bobbing along, that I had never seen before, especially this far from land. As I got closer, I identified what was clearly a makeshift raft, made from lashed together bamboo, with a snapped mast, and an empty cooler moored to the deck. Upon this raft was not a soul. The chances of coming across a raft to begin with are small enough in that part of the ocean. Thinking about the person, who once sailed that raft, why they sailed, and how they met their fate, that was what creeped me out. Here's hoping they were rescued by another ship, and left the raft for scuttle, but I have a strong feeling that our mysterious captain didn't make it. It was a foggy night off the shore of Long Island and I was on a 75-foot schooner. The fog was so thick that you couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of you. The captain tells me there is no point to continue my watch at the bow of the ship, and him and I start talking at the stern. About that time there is thunk on the side of the ship. We both turn to see a figure dressed in black flowing robes walking towards us on the outside of the ship. The robes were scratching down the outside of the ship. It keeps coming closer and is high enough in the air that the top was about even with our heads. It turns out that it was just a black flag to mark a lobster pot. But for those first few seconds it was terrifying. LOL. Stupid creepy lobster pots. Not me, but my father back in his commercial fishing days noticed that there was a t-shirt in the middle of his net after one tow. After a little investigation he found that it was not a shirt, but a human torso wearing a shirt. He said he was terrified that he would open the net and a head would roll out onto his feet, but it didn't happen. His captain radioed ahead and they brought the torso back to the docks, where they were met by the police and a coroner. They were eventually able to identify the body based on the clothing as a victim of a plane crash that had occurred fairly recently. My dad said he offered a free lobster to the coroner, who graciously accepted it until he found out that it had been found in the net with the body. After that he got angry and told him to throw it back. That understandable. That lobster probably had been eating the torso. Fishing out near the Great Barrier Reef, and my brother who gets seasick decides to go for a swim to settle his stomach. In less than a minute after getting back into the boat, a 17-foot great white went under the boat. I've been told that unassisted swimmers don't resemble their prey. On the other hand, I've also been told that Santa Claus is real. The stars. When you're 3 days from the nearest land, and it's a clear night, more stars than you could ever imagined, and enough shooting stars to make you run out of wishes. It was also pretty cool being stuck in the Panama Canal with a Los Angeles class submarine when they had to shut down the locks. Before we knew what was going on, there were helicopters everywhere dropping off Marines to set up around the lock. California to Los Angeles. We camped out on top of a boat in the Bahamas out of sight of land one night. Holy crap, the stars and that feeling of the earth falling away underneath you on all sides. Feel like small critters. Toilets on boats are usually plumbed with seawater because it makes no sense to crap in your limited drinking water. One night I was taking the watch on a long haul sail up the US East Coast. We were rounding the FL Keys about to point towards Maine. I had to use the head, so I went below and pumped some water into the bowl. It was glowing in the dark. Freaked me out so much. Turns out there is photoluminescent phytoplankton in the water which will glow if pumped into a dark toilet bowl. No longer scary, actually pretty neat. Photoluminescent phytoplankton. Extremely satisfying to say. Heard this from a mate. Australian naval supply ship in the Great Southern Ocean, next to another naval ship. Swell was so great, the top of one ship's mast was deck level to the supply ship. Another, told by a different mate, they were fishing off the shelf, off NSW, boat big enough to hold 6 blokes. A shark longer than their boat swam past. They packed up and went home. Some things are too big and have too many teeth to fish near. Yikes, makes me wonder, how large can carnivorous sharks truly grow? There must be at least a few huge sharks out there larger than anyone has ever seen. Well, I'm no sailor, but I'm in the military. On 9/11/2013 I was on a ship in the Red Sea. We were having a ceremony in remembrance of 9/11, when up floats a dead body right next to the ship. We were all locked down pretty quickly so that they could send out a couple small boats to retrieve it. Never did hear anything more about it. Pretty dang weird if you ask me though. Not the sea, but on Lake Michigan we saw a huge float of blow-up dolls all tied together just floating. There was probably about 15 of them just tied together floating there. Was freaking strange to say the least. Hopefully the person who tied them together is a redditor and you've finally given him recognition for his life's work. Probably late to this, but whatever. I was working on a car carrier 4 years ago in the Middle East. Our typical route went through pirate waters at times, and so we always picked up 4 ex-Marines as security in Aqaba, Jordan before we went. One night while we were going through pirate waters off of Yemen we started to have problems with the main engine. So we stopped and had to drift for a bit to figure out what the problem was. During this time I was working on the stern, back end of the vessel. I couldn't really see anything out in the ocean. Everything was dimly lit on the ship. I don't know why, but I got bored and turned on the spotlight and there he was. This guy with a gun in a rusted little boat staring at me about 15 feet from the ship. I just stared back at him, kind of stunned. I was afraid if I reached for the radio to call one of the Marines he'd shoot me. The Marines had weapons. So he looked at me and I looked at him and he sort of gave me a nod as if he was telling me well played and I gave him one back. Then he slowly rowed his boat back off into the deep pitch black night. I didn't know how many others there were, but I did call it in on the radio as soon as I lost sight of him. I still remember his face today, that deep stern concentrated look. I love a good manly nod that conveys so much meaning. Hurricane Katrina. We followed it down to provide aid for what everyone knew was going to be a disaster. It was as if the world had split in two. Above us was this beautiful sky with a few clouds strewn about, and then, not far ahead, was this ghastly monster that engulfed up the rest of the sky. It was green and purple and black. The clouds twisted in a way I've never seen before, and the seas were very deceptive. If you looked at the water you were sailing on, the swells didn't look that intense, but I saw frigates and destroyers swallowed bow first and shot through the other side. I was lucky. My ship was quite large. Even we were getting pelted on the 05 level of a supply ship, TAOE, and they were forget ever walking in a straight line. Most of the time you'd be walking on the deck one moment and then the bulkhead, wall, the next. I've been in rough seas before on both smaller and larger platforms, but Hurricane Katrina took the cake. It was just an event, one that I'm glad I was following and not intercepting. Would love to have seen photos of that. Hurricane Katrina. My ship had just passed Cook's Passage when the wind and swell drastically increased. From the bridge wings you could touch the top of the swell and the deck was flooded constantly. The scariest part was when we found our holds were taking in water. I was in the Navy Standing Watch in Operations Center. We were off the coast of San Diego. It was a very calm, clear night. Very smooth water. It was just me and a buddy on watch. I stepped out on the port side of the bridge under the bright moonlight. As my eyes adjusted, I started to see a circle form in the water and just grow and grow, making a perfect circle. I then noticed another and another. My mind tripped and could not figure out what was causing these massive circles forming near our ship. I went in and grabbed my buddy, went back out and the circles were still forming. Being a big ship, we were pretty high off the water, and as we watched, I realized what was happening. Porpoises were chasing schools of fish up to the surface of the water, and as the fish hit the surface they started spreading out in perfect circles and we'd see the porpoises break the surface in the middle and dive back down. It was an amazing sight at night. I seriously thought I was seeing some type of alien activity in the water for a minute there. The ocean at night is a beautiful and scary thing. Everyone should experience it at least once in their life. My uncle runs a charter fishing boat. He loves telling the story about how he was out in the ocean on his boat at night, and there was this beautiful woman floating in a raft unconscious. He and my cousin pulled her aboard and she began to regain consciousness and she was really drunk. Apparently she ended up being on a party boat earlier and everyone just thought she was being too annoying. So to get rid of her they just put her on a raft and sent her off. That's really horrible. I hope those people were scared that they killed her for a few days. Lived on a sailboat in Malaysia for a while. The monstrous jellyfish that would come floating by silently out of nowhere scared the absolute crap out of me. Easily half a meter in diameter, and hundreds of them. Worst creatures ever. I've lived in Malaysia for 11 years. I get quite bitter about the way they treat their environment. Since they let them eat all the leatherback turtle eggs, it's not surprising jellyfish numbers would go apeshit. Finally somewhere I can tell this story. Quite possibly the strangest thing I have ever seen in my life. It was about 2 AM in the middle of the Atlantic and very dark with no moon. As I was walking up to the bow of our sailboat to inspect the sails, I saw a faint glow in the water a long way off. I stared at the glow a long time before I realized there were actually two glowing objects moving quickly underwater, on a collision course with our boat. Immediately I thought it was some submarine or torpedo, about to ram our boat. But then the glowing shapes came right alongside the boat, perhaps a foot underwater. They were two ghostly blue dolphins. glowing brightly and so vivid and close in the clear water. I immediately realized the dolphins were being illuminated by bioluminescent plankton. But the sight was surreal. I watched them play in our bow wave for a while, imagining sailors of the past witnessing these eerie dolphin spirits and how mind-blowing that must have been. Seeing things like that makes you understand how ancient mariners would believe in merfolk and the like. When I was 19, I had just gone to sea for the first time with the US Navy. A few days after heading to the Gulf of Mexico for a few weeks of drug ops, we were dispatched to the Straits of Florida because Fidel Castro had opened the doors, and people were fleeing Cuba in droves. It was called Operation Able Vigil. One night after standing watch all day over dozens of people who'd been pulled out of the water, I was standing on the O3 level of the ship with a chief, smoking a cigarette. It was the only exterior surface of the ship not coverage with refugees. It was a full bright moon that you could see reflecting on the ocean's surface, and we were talking about how crazy this all was, and looking at all of the other Navy and Coast Guard ships on the horizon doing slow circles looking for people like we were. Suddenly in the reflection of the moon, we both saw something pass through the reflection. He looked at me, and I nodded that yes, I too had seen something. He took off like a shot to the bridge, and ship started to circle back towards the thing we'd seen. It was a person in a life preserver just floating in the middle of the Straits of Florida, hoping someone would see him. There we were on this $2 billion missile-loaded warship doing slow circles, looking for people in the water. All told, my ship saved and or transported 1,800 people back to Gitmo for processing. Keeping in mind, ship's crew was only about 400 people. It left a big impression on 19-year-old me. I was in Angola surveying a 5-meter wide corridor in preparation for the installation of a pipeline. We stumble upon this foot-long cylindrical item. Lots of head scratching. Later the client requests that it be relocated out of the corridor. The ROV moves in and inspects the item closer. Tin can, compressed air bottle, ordnance. ROV carefully picks the item up with its manipulator, then splat. It's only a huge bloody hunk of salami about 1,400 meters beneath the surface. Wasn't expecting that. Other finds include a twin drum washing machine and a toilet seat. I'm 58 now. When I was a kid, the retired couple next door babysat me. When the husband was a young man, he was a telegrapher at sea. Their ship was in the North Atlantic and he was on duty the 15th of April, 1912. He heard the distress call from the Titanic. Wish I'd interviewed him on tape. Going through the Suez Canal at night from Egypt. Our ship was third in the convoy. You could see the ship in front of us fade into the darkness, but still able to see the lights. Then they vanished, like they were turned off. The lights in the sides of the canal vanished as well. After some time passed, we could see what the frick happened. We sailed right into a wall of fog so thick I could barely see my hands at the end of my arms. And when I say a wall, I mean it. There was no gradual build. It was not scary, but it felt otherworldly. I felt like on the other end if that fog would be another time, like 1948 or something. While traveling between Key West, FL and Norfolk, VA, roughly near Miami, our lookout called away a ship at 090. We got on our radar, range of 80 miles, and there wasn't a thing on it. A few of us went up to the crow's nest and used the mounted binoculars to look out there, and a World War II style battleship could be hazily seen on the horizon. No evidence of it whatsoever would present itself on the radar. Pretty creepy. Not a sailor, but I do fish in the Gulf quite often. A few years ago I'm down in the Thousand Islands area, SWFL, doing some backwater fishing with a buddy, and we hear that thump thump of a helicopter off in the distance. So we look up and watch a Coast Guard chopper trying to catch up to a speedboat. The chopper flies ahead, rotates so its side is facing the front of the boat, and just opens up on the engines of the boat with a machine gun. Boat explodes into fire. I'm guessing it hit a fuel tank, and the chopper starts hovering in a circle of sorts looking for survivors. At this point my friend and I are like, yay, we should just get the frick out of here. A little later on we did see what looked like a smaller Coast Guard ship heading out to that point. I'm guessing it was some sort of drug smuggling operation out of Cuba. Made for an interesting Saturday afternoon. Out sea on a small fishing boat 50 feet I think. One night after we set the gear, my brother and I chucked a shark hook in to see what's out there. Went inside, chucked on the telly and having a cone when we felt the boat move unnaturally. Checked the hook and we had a good sized Mako Est 14 FT on it. Now being a shark lover, I really wanted this thing to go free, so we tried to get it up onto the gantry to let the slack off so we could unclip it. As we were lifting it, it was getting lighter instead of heavier and the shark was absolutely flipping out. By the time we got it above water level, from its pectoral fins down was gone apart from bits of cartilage, shark bone, and then we seen them. I don't know how many apart from a metric crap ton of big butt squid. If one of us had fallen in wrestling this monster Mako, it would have been all over. This memory really sticks out for some reason, or a real creepy sound. There are a few out there, is whales. On a small fishing boat, your bed is below water line. You can hear whales yabbering. It isn't quite as relaxing as a whale song CD. Freakiest was when we had to run for shelter behind a rock. It's a well-known safe rock. If any of you have seen Deadliest Catch, they use them occasionally. Just a big butt rock that protects you from wind and waves. We made it. The boat 3 or 4 miles behind didn't. They all died. Not my story, but my dad's. He was in the Navy on an oiler in the first Gulf War. One morning he was shooting the crap in the mess before going down to the boiler room, and one of the other department heads mentioned he needed to go to a casino and gamble after they got back from the deployment, as they had gotten extremely lucky the night before. They had steamed through a minefield in an oiler ammo ship, with enough jet A, bunker fuel and ammo to level several small nations. Dad said if they had hit a mine in the right spot, he'd not have had time to even mentally process what was happening. So I was on the Eagle, big 300 feet Nazi pirate ship the US captured after World War II, crossing the Atlantic. Was supposed to go on helm lookout watch at 1130 PM. Slept through my alarm, woke up at 1 and realized I was late. I hopped out of my rack, went topside and tried to head for the lookout group in hopes of hopping on with them and pretending I was there all along. As I'm walking towards the bow, imagine something out of Pirates of the Caribbean. Instead of a group of cadets shooting the bull looking through binoculars, there's just a single person who I didn't remember being part of the crew. Just 50 people. Full stop. He's standing with his back to me, staring straight ahead at the full moon, which is right off the bow with a reflection lighting up the water. I walk towards him, when without warning he turns around. I'm sure at this point that I've never seen him before. Flashes a creepy smile, holds up a pair of binoculars and says hello. These are for you. It turned out the group that was supposed to be up there was back swapping out, and the guy was just a temp who had come for the cruise at the last minute and was up enjoying the moon. But for a few moments it seemed like I'd wandered into the middle of a horror story in the middle of the ocean, and I briefly debated jumping overboard. Luckily I did not. Back in December of 2013 I was in the USCG doing a patrol down by Cuba. We were about 10 nm offshore at about 0300. We could see this light in the shape of a cube gyrating and moving erratically. We had some pretty powerful binoculars and were studying it for the better part of an hour. As it is spinning, we could see the reflection of it on the water as well, so it was a mile or so offshore. We continued watching it and then it zipped straight up in the air. We were all pretty freaked out and just stayed silent the rest of our watch. Coast Guard, South Florida. Late 1980s. Cuban refugee who didn't make it floating in the water used the boat hook to snag his belt. The belt pulled right through what was left of his decaying, bloated meat and caught on his vertebral column, and we brought him up on deck. It remains the weirdest, most disgusting thing I think I've ever witnessed. On a 40 featuring sailboat off the coast of Bermuda, no breeze, so we were just kind of sitting there. A blue whale swam under our boat with a baby. The small one was bigger than our boat. The large one was twice as big as the boat. Terrifying. When I was off the coast of Japan in 2007, I watched a whale die. I couldn't tell the gender, but I remember hearing those faint whale cries that you can sometimes hear at night beneath the surface. The moon was full and I could see it on top of the water, and I saw other whales passing around it. Do whales have funerals? Because it felt like a vigil or saying goodbye. You could hear the faint puffs of the blowhole spraying out water in a laboured way. I don't know if it was hurt or just old. These other whales made a few passes and then they left, and the whale wasn't spouting air anymore. This was all in a 15-minute period as we cruised past. I guess the whales may have been there longer, but I feel that they know that they don't want to stay around dead bodies for long. It was haunting and beautiful, and I don't think I had ever cried as much as I had that night. That is incredible. During a transatlantic sail, we saw this clump of brown about 200 yards off our starboard bow. When we sailed closer to get a close look, it was 6 leatherback turtles all dead. It looked as if someone had intentionally caught them, tied them together and left them for dead. We ended up cutting the lines and let them drift apart. This though was no accident. Turtles don't get tangled together and somehow make perfect bowlines and double half hitches. I was pretty pee off. The next week we arrived in St. Helena, which was kinda our halfway point, and I told the local turtle care initiative. Till this day I still have no clue why someone would just tie turtles together and let them die. That had to be some sick freak. Sounds like someone lost their catch. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.